Let's cut out our 18th century pocket pattern. The items you need are your pattern, of course, fabric scissors, a ruler, something to hold your pattern down like pattern weights, and then something to draw on your fabric with. I recommend that you guys use a pencil, but that does not show up well on camera. So what I am using instead is an ultra washable Crayola fine point marker. This does wash out, but if your pencil does mark on your fabric, I would rather you guys use that. Okay, so on our pattern, we have the instructions for how many pieces we need to cut out. It says cut to fashion and cut to lining. Fashion means the outside of the garment. So this is the fabric that I've chosen for the outside of my pocket. I need to cut 2 of these. And then I've chosen this fabric for my lining. So we'll cut 2 pieces out of this as well. Now there's 2 main ways to cut patterns for theater. We can do it the theatrical way where we have a stitch line and everything, but for this project, I want you to explore learning how to sew something like a commercial sewing pattern. So we are actually going to have your fabric prepped like this. So you've got your fabric, and I want you to layer it like this so that it is folded. There are on this fabric the wrong side and the right side, and that's really visible. I want to cut this fabric out with the wrong sides touching each other so I can see the right side of the fabric. This is the normal way to cut commercial patterns. In theater, we do something different, and we will do that for your shorts. The other thing that I want to point out on your pattern is that we've got this grain line. So the fabric that you guys are using for class is going to be a woven fabric. The grain line runs parallel to the selvage edge, which is down here. The finished edge of the fabric, where it is folded together from how it came off the bolt, is the selvage edge. So we want this to be running parallel to the selvage line. Now, there are some reasons that you would change this direction. First of all, is if your pattern has a direction to it. So for example, these are stripes. If I wanted the stripes to go across my pattern this way, I would actually lay the pattern down like this so that my stripes go across. But I like the idea of the pattern of my fabric, the stripes going up and down the pocket. So I'm actually gonna lay it this way. And that is the true grain. So when you lay it down, you want to measure, if you are doing your grain line to the actual selvage edge, you want to measure and make sure that this is perfectly straight. You don't want it slightly crooked like that because it will change how this fabric reacts when you're sewing. So here is how we check to make sure that this is perfectly straight. You're going to take your ruler and you're going to measure from one end of the arrow to the selvage edge. That is 9 inches right here. Now I'm going to measure the other side of my arrow, and hey, I managed, it's 9 inches. I managed to lay it down perfectly straight. So you measure each side of the arrow from the selvage edge to make sure you are perfectly on grain. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my pattern weights down. Make sure your fabric is all smoothed out and flat. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take our ruler. This one actually has something on it. I'm going to grab a different one. We're going to take our ruler and we're going to measure the seam allowance onto here. This is a little different from a commercial pattern. Normally you would just go right on the line, but we want to practice the skill of measuring with our rulers from the edge of a pattern piece. So what we're going to do, I'll lay this where you can see the ruler really well. Get something to point with. Remember, on these blue rulers, the space from this edge to right here is 1/2 inch. If you add one little block, that is 5/8 of an inch. Look at your pattern. You have plus 5/8 on each edge of your pattern. That means we need to add 5/8 of an inch for our seam allowance, because right here, our pattern says NSA. That tells us the seam allowance is not included. If you were to cut the pattern out without adding the seam allowance on, your pocket's going to be smaller than the actual paper. So I'm going to take my ruler There's my 1/2 inch line. I'm gonna slide it up. So I've got 1/2 inch plus 1 square, and that is 5/8. And now I'm just gonna draw a line. This is going to be my cut line. And I'm gonna go all the way around the whole pattern, just like this. If you notice, this edge of the pattern curves. So what you need to do, you can't measure a big giant length because you're gonna get off, is measure it in small sections. So from here to here is 5/8. That's actually coming out right. So I'm rotating my ruler to go around these curves with the measurement. And these sharper curves, I like to just do a little dashed line because I can either connect them later, or if my dashes are close enough together, it's not difficult to connect them with my scissors when I go to cut. The bottom is fairly straight. Cut off a little bit right there. There we go. There's some dark parts on this pattern. I hope you guys can see on the camera where these lines are. And now we've got a line that goes around our pocket that is 5/8 of an inch from the edge of the paper. This is our fashion fabric. Get that out of the way. Because it is double-sided, when we cut through both of these layers, we're actually cutting 2 pieces. My personal preference when I am cutting like this, and I highly recommend that you guys do this too, is I like to pin through my layers to make sure that the fabric doesn't shift as I am cutting. So I'm just using some straight pins, not a whole ton, but enough that I don't want this fabric to slide with each other. It's less of a problem with quilting cotton, which is what you will be using. It is definitely something you should do if you are working with a slippery fabric. You should pin the thing together if you're cutting through 2 layers. Normally, this isn't always the way that we cut fabric for theater. And I'm cutting through both layers right on my line. To make going around this curve a little easier, I'm actually gonna cut off the edge there, get my fabric out of the way. Now I have got a loose section of fabric that's just easier to cut with. If you notice, the scissors that I am using look a little different from yours. These are spring-loaded scissors. They help decrease tension on your wrist when you are cutting a lot. And I cut fabric a lot, so. All right, so now we can take the pins out. Where'd my pin tray go? Take our pins out. Now we have 2 pieces of our fashion fabric. And now we need to do our lining fabric. So I'm gonna set those aside, pull out my lining fabric. Again, I have folded it. This has a wrong side and a right side. I have folded it in a way that I can see the right side of the fabric. This is going to be the lining. This goes on the inside of my pocket. And this has got a nice directional pattern to it. It's got kind of a stripe, so I'm going to go this way with my pattern. And this doesn't have a true grain because it's a scrap of fabric, so I'm just going to visually get this as straight as I can to the pattern. Okay, and we're going to do just like we did before. I'm going to put my pattern weights down to keep my pattern in place, and I'm going to measure out 5/8 of an inch. Now, you could, if you were rushed for time, you could lay your other pattern down, pin it together, but do not do that for this project. That is a tip for later in your skill level, because then your lining may not be as accurate as sewing it this way. Sorry, cutting it this way. Okay, just like before, adding on my seam allowance. Rotating my ruler around the curves. Oop, I got way off. Make sure you are paying careful attention that you are lined up to the right line. I was not that time. Okay. Get this out of the way. Do the same pinning through my layers like I did before, so my fabric doesn't shift on myself. Fabric, I can move it around a bit easier. Okay, make sure all of that is nice and flat and smooth. And cut out those pieces. Okay, take the pins out of this. Okay, so now we have 2 pieces of our fashion fabric and 2 pieces of our lining fabric. And we are ready to begin our next steps to start sewing this together.